Hi everyone. In this video, I'll be going over APA citations, so in-text citations and parenthetical citations using the 7th edition of APA. I will say citations, somewhat challenging, but not nearly as much as references. So maybe that's helpful. Okay, so citations use the author date system. So each work used has two parts, an in-text citation and a corresponding reference list entry. So the in-text citation part appears within the body of the paper, meaning, which is why we call it in text, right? And it briefly identifies the cited work. This helps readers to locate the corresponding entry in the alphabetical reference list at the end of the paper. In the other way, each reference provides the author, the date, the title, the source of the work, and so on and so on. So it's going to be the more extensive version to locate the information or that article, but it should have a matching citation in your paper. So every in-text citation should have a matching reference, and every reference should have a matching in-text citation, okay? There are a couple of different kinds. We'll start with parenthetical. So with a parenthetical citation, both the author and publication date are provided within parentheses and separated by a comma. Okay, so you can see at the bottom in my example, we have Kohler, comma, 2016, and those two things are within the parentheses, okay? The parenthetical citations can appear at the middle or at the end of the sentence. You wouldn't put a parenthetical citation at the beginning of a sentence because that just wouldn't make any sense, okay? If your parenthetical citation is at the end of the sentence, put a period after it, like in the example you can see below. If it's in the middle of the sentence, that obviously wouldn't happen. But if you do need to add a comma there, it would be after the parentheses. Okay, so parenthetical means inside parentheses within your text, author's last name, comma, space, year. Okay, and I'm going to give you more details about this later. Okay. The other version of in-text citation is a narrative citation, and this involves the author name and publication date being incorporated into the text as part of the sentence. For example, I have here Kohler, and then you have the date, the year, in parentheses, 2016, noted the dangers of falsely balanced news coverage. Okay, so the difference here is that only the year is placed within the parentheses. The author name or names are included within the sentence. Okay, it's two different ways to do it. Both ways are right. Now, a situation that you might encounter is if you're citing multiple different articles within the same parenthetical citation or in the same narrative. If you're doing that, that's okay. You want to place the citations in alphabetical order by first author's last name and separate them with semicolons. So in the example, you can see Adams et al. Period, comma, 2019, space, period, 2019, semicolon, space, Shumway, space, ampersand, space, Schulman, comma, space, 2015, semicolon, space, Westinghouse, comma, space, 2017, close parentheses. I noticed there that I'm missing the open parentheses before Adams, before the A in Adams, so that should be there. Sorry about that. And so notice that these are in order by the author's last name, the first author's last name. So Adams goes before Shumway, and Shumway goes before Westinghouse. Okay. All right. You would also arrange two or more works by the same author by year of publication. So if you have, for example, two articles by Smith, and it's the same Smith, meaning they have the same first initials too, you're going to write it as you can see here in the example with the earlier ones going first. So 2017 going before 2019. Now you also see that I have N.D. So that's if there's no date. So very rarely you'll encounter an article that doesn't give you a publication date. And if you want to cite that, you can, and you would just write N.D. as no date. Okay, and that would go first in your list in this case. You can also include articles that are forthcoming or in press, meaning that they haven't been published yet. And you would add those at the very end of the parenthetical citation and write in press. Okay. If multiple sources are cited within the narrative of a sentence, they can appear in whatever order you want. It gets a little bit clunky if you have multiple authors, but it's doable if you want to do it. Now, a common error that I see with writing in this class in particular is that you might read, say, 10 different articles that are saying the same thing. CBT works for depression. And so then when you're writing it up, I'll see all 10 articles cited in the parentheses. And so you have like a paragraph full of citations. That's really not necessary. You want to only include as many citations as necessary to support your immediate point in that sentence. So of those 10 articles, which one or two or maybe three have the most strong evidence to support your point? Only include those. Okay. Now, where citations get a little bit challenging sometimes can be with how many how many authors to include within your citation. And the reason why this is a little bit more difficult is because in the 6th edition, the rules were different. So in the 7th edition, the rules have changed and they're much more simple to follow, I think. So for a work with 1 or 2 authors, you're going to include the 1 or 2 authors' names in every citation. Okay, and so you can see in the example, there's a parenthetical and a narrative example of an article with 2 authors, Smith and Rodriguez. Okay. The only difference is that in your parenthetical, you use an ampersand, the symbol, right, as opposed to writing out the word and, A-N-D, okay, in the parenthetical. But in your narrative, you do not use the ampersand. You never use an ampersand in a narrative. You write out the word and, A-N-D, okay? So that's for 1 or 2 authors. Now, if you have 3 or more authors, the rule is a little bit different. You're going to include only the name of the first author, so in this case, Lopez, and then you would put space ET space AL period, okay? So Lopez et al. Period, okay? And this is if you have 3 or more, so 3 to 100, you're only going to include the first author's name in every citation, including the first one. So this is different from the 6th edition, okay? Now I have examples here of how you would do that in parenthetical as well as in narrative. Okay, so parenthetical, I already told you, parentheses, Lopez et al. Period, comma, space 2002. If you wanted to include it in your narrative, you could write Lopez et al. Period, and then your year in the parentheses, provided evidence, blah, 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 blah. You could also, in the narrative only, not in the parentheses, but in the narrative only, you could change et al. To be and colleagues or and authors or whatever. To make it flow a little bit better if you want. So either one of these would be appropriate. And again, this is for articles with 3 or more authors. Okay. Now there's one exception to this where you would include more than the first author in a case of 3 or more authors, and that is when you need to avoid ambiguity. So I'm going to talk about that next. Okay. So you may find that you have multiple articles with 3 or more authors and the same publication year, and that they shorten to the same in-text citation. So let's say you have, for example, an article by Smith, Rodriguez, and Gonzalez, 2002, and you have another article by Smith, James, and Whitney, 2002. Both of those would shorten to Smith et al. 2002, comma 2002, right? First one and the second one, they would both shorten to Smith et al., comma 2002, but they're different articles and they have different author names. So that's not okay. So what you're going to do in that case is write out as many author names as you need to distinguish the references and then abbreviate the rest to et al. In every citation. Do I have an example? I do. So here's an example. You have these 2 articles, Kapoor, Bloom, Montes, Warner, and Hill 2017, and then Kapoor, Bloom, Zucker, Tang, et cetera, 2017. So they would both shorten to Kapoor et al. 2017. So to avoid that ambiguity, we're going to add as many authors as necessary to distinguish them, which in this case is 3, because the third author is different in both of these. So the first one would shorten to Kapoor, comma, Bloom, comma, Montes, comma, et al. Period, year. Whereas the second one would be written as Kapoor, comma, Bloom, comma, Zucker, comma, et al. Okay. Now, because et al. Is plural, it can't stand in for only one name. So if there were only 4 authors in this case, you wouldn't write et al., you'd just write the 4th one. Okay. But only in these cases, because remember, all other times when there's 3 or more, you're going to write et al., right? Okay. So there's an example for you. And if that's unclear at all, just let me know and I'll explain it again. Another thing that you might encounter is two works or two articles with the same author and same date. Okay, so when multiple references have an identical author or authors and publication year, you're going to include a lowercase letter after the year to distinguish which is which. So for example, we have two articles here by Judge and Kameyer Molnar, and they're both written in 2012, but they're different articles. So the very first one that you cite, you're going to add a little lowercase a little lowercase a there, as you can see in that first bullet point, or that first sub bullet point, I guess. And then when you're citing the second article by them, you're going to add a B. Then in your reference page, and this is really important, you're also going to add that same small lowercase letter to the reference. The logic being, if your reader wants to find this one, this first one, the Judge and Kramer Molnar 2012 A, and they go to your reference page and you don't have the A and the B, then they don't know which of the articles is the right one. So make sure to include that in the reference. Okay. Next thing, almost done here, is if you have a group author. So if a reference has a group author, the name of the group can sometimes be abbreviated. For example, American Psychological Association is sometimes abbreviated APA. You're not obligated to abbreviate it as APA. And you should only do it if you're going to use it at least 3 times. So if you're going to say American Psychological Association 3 or more times, go ahead and introduce the abbreviation and only use the abbreviation moving forward. So you're going to provide the full name of the group on the first mention, the very first time you mention it in the text. And then in parentheses, you're going to provide the abbreviation. And there are 2 different ways to do that. In the first one here, I have it in a narrative. The American Psychological Association, parentheses, APA, comma, space, year, okay? In the second example, I have it in a parenthetical citation. So you have parentheses, American Psychological Association, and then you're going to use brackets to give the abbreviation, comma, space, year, parentheses, okay? In the reference list, though, do not abbreviate the group author name. You write the full name, okay? Even though you introduced the abbreviation in your text, the full name needs to be in the reference list, okay? And then if you happen to have 2 groups that abbreviate to the same letters, like American Psychological Association and American Psychiatric Association, both turn into APA, then do not abbreviate them to APA. Spell out the name every single time so that you can avoid any ambiguity. Okay. I've also given you here some information about how you would cite and reference the DSM to make things a little bit easier for you, because the DSM can be kind of funky to cite. And so there's an example of a parenthetical and a narrative, and then every other time how you would go ahead and do it. I've also given you the full reference for the for the DSM to make it easier for you, so that you should never have an incorrect DSM reference in your work, because it's right here for you, yeah? Okay. And then here are a couple special cases. For the publication date, you're only going to use the year. This is a little different from some other types of formatting that are not APA. So you don't use the month or the date, just the year. And if there's no year, remember you can write N.D. for no date. For author names, you're only using the last names, not suffixes. When a text and a citation appear together in parentheses, use a semicolon to separate the citation from the text. Don't use parentheses within parentheses. So for example, if you were writing like, there are lots of different kinds of fruits, parentheses, E.G. comma, apples, comma, pears, comma, and I'm blanking on another fruit, watermelons. And then you wanted to provide a citation, you would then do semicolon after watermelons and then provide your citation. There's a better example written out there right here for you, falsely balanced news coverage, semicolon space citation, okay? All right, so that's it for in-text citations. Just like with the reference one, it's a lot and it's a lot to remember. So print it out, take some notes, write some examples, and then when you're starting to write and plug in your citations, reference back to it until you get the hang of it. And be sure to check your work afterward, or have a peer check your work afterward, because it's easy to make mistakes on these. Okay, all right, that's it. Let me know if you've got questions. Thank you.